Just looking beyond it, Dr. Calhoun, obviously AZD 1222 is among the competing therapies that we have in late stage trials now. And what really stands out to me in looking at the list of these potential candidates that we have in terms of having an mRNA platform option, we have the adenovirus options. We have some that are being assessed as boosters, many being assessed as booster doses, some being assessed as singular doses. I just want to get your thoughts on, I guess, the variety of late stage assessment we're already at for coronavirus vaccines.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, you can look at parallels for what we've done in the past. And my example earlier is you also have to think about how should the vaccine be delivered, right? Which route of administration so that it is effective. Many times, it's not only about the specific pieces of the antigen, but also, as you described, the delivery, so that we can evoke an immune response as quickly as possible to a very targeted antigen. And sometimes we can pair part of a viral antigen with something else that the person can recognize quite quickly or has already been infected with. So a lot of science goes into this, a lot of brilliant people working on it, and different approaches. And, we've had some good success with viruses in the past and very effective vaccination programs, and some not as successful. A decade ago or so, we were still looking at an HIV vaccine, and unfortunately we're not there yet either. So, we have successes and we have areas that we haven't yet been so successful in, and we learn from every single one. And that's what advances vaccine development to now allow us to do it in an expedited format.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as the candidates themselves are diversified, it seems like a lot of the outcomes that we're trying to seek are also pretty diverse across these different candidates, some age stratification, some even still dose finding, trying to understand how can we achieve immunity at which doses, which levels do we have to get to? Is it still tolerable at that level? Well, I was curious to ask you in your expertise exactly what would stand out to you as it doesn't even just have to be one. If there's a few, just big wins that we can have in these phase 3 data that will eventually come.
Great. So one of the areas is that we like to see how long is immunity provided for, right? So is this a short-term immunity, or does this confer lifelong immunity? And that is, of course, yet to be determined. So I think in terms of short-term goals and short-term assessment is what level of detectable antibodies can be present after administration. And then we can follow to see how long they're retained for. But one of the biggest challenges is that viruses are dynamic, right? So once we have the structure and the sequencing of a virus, it can change. And you hear us even in the general population talk about how viruses mutate. So that remains a challenge too, particularly if we realize, or if we learn that we're going to have to use boosters, which means that we will have to continually modify the vaccination, which then modifies the entire vaccination process. So a lot still to be learned about how long we're conferring immunity for, and if that immunity then prevents reinfection.
Yeah, absolutely. And alluding again to the next question of, you mentioned just before we got going here, of course, the idea of a post-vaccination world. Obviously, there's a lot of emphasis right now on what the prioritization is going to look like. And informally speaking, it looks like we're pretty squared away with the idea of course, protect our healthcare workers first, protect the people who will be administering vaccines, then get to our highest risk populations and start working downward, right? So beyond that, obviously, I think a lot of people's investment right now is understanding when exactly they'll be able to resume a sense of normalcy. And obviously, the vaccine, as Dr. Fauci told us just last week, is going to be the great indicator of that. How many people are going to get it? How effective is it? As you alluded to, how long does the immunity last? All that's going to sort of dictate our resumption of life. I just wanted to see if you have an idea of what it looks like if things are going well and exactly what that timeline is.
So one of the things that I was surprised I haven't heard much about in the past few months is in this post-vaccine time. And, deploying a workforce that has to leave their existing workforce to deliver now millions of doses of vaccines is a real issue and a real workforce issue. So I think modern day, people are not as patient as they may have been in prior mass vaccination programs. You know, people in the past were willing to stand outside in a line around the block, you know, in some cases to get their vaccines. And I don't really see the temperament of contemporary American life. I don't see many people willing to do that. So I think we have to talk about the mass production of vaccines and then getting them out, but also who is going to administer them. And how are we going to do it in a quickly efficient way, as you described, by stratifying and prioritizing those at greatest risk for negative outcomes and comorbidities and those sorts of things that can contribute to a risk stratification. So we're going to have to take clinicians, pharmacists, physician assistants, nurses, physicians, all of those folks away from their current jobs, right? And try to administer very prompt and very widespread vaccinations. And how that will be done, I'm not quite sure. I could see that there may be something similar to the testing that we've done where you drive up and you get it and you drive on out. Although, you know, you have to be really careful for that, because what if somebody has an adverse effect in the minutes after? You know, you can't have them just drive out of the parking lot. So lot of considerations, a lot of things to think about in terms of what this will look like. But hopefully we'll all resume back to some level of normalcy. But at the end of all this, I hope people have a greater respect for infectious diseases. I hope people have a better appreciation of the vaccine preventable conditions that we do have. I hope people have more respect for viruses in general and see how devastating they can be to mankind, because in the war between viruses and man, you know, we don't always win, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe there'll be some take homes. My wish list would include some folks who were resistant to getting vaccines in the past, or more importantly, those who were resistant to getting their children vaccinated. I hope they'll see now some further evidence that vaccines are beneficial and save lives. So hopefully those will be some of the outcomes we'll see in a few years.